Here's our next patient. I give you Frosty. He was manufactured by the Empire Plastics Corporation in the 1960s. I could just imagine the amount of joy he's brought families over the 60 plus years since he was manufactured. I could almost feel the energy. But he's had some bad years too. He's starting to break down. He's fallen a few times, got some serious holes, and some major damage in the back. I'll show you the details. First of all, his entire glove area is missing. And then there is a major stress crack across his chest. Extremely brittle. It just falls apart in your hands. On the back of Frosty, there's a major structural crack that starts at his elbow, travels diagonally across his backside, almost 3/4 of the way down his back, transcends to then a vertical crack, the crack continues around to the C, and eventually it'll go full circle and this whole section would break away. So to repair this, we need to get these pieces together, but as you can see, since it hasn't been repaired for a while and allowed to set, the plastic kind of starts going into its own direction to the circle of the mold. So we need to heat this to get this soft so we could move it around, and then stitch it in place so we could glue it so the stitches hold it together structurally, and then glue it along the seam, working the repair to close the crack up to the arm. That's just the way to do it. So to perform the repair on the back of Frosty, this is what we're going to need. First of all, you're going to want to clean it all good with lacquer thinner. The lacquer thinner won't affect HDPE, but it will clean it good. A heat gun, some steel wool, small pliers, end cutters, hot melt glue, high temperature, hot melt glue gun, 100 watt, and a 30 watt soldering gun with a very clean tip, some cable ties, 4-inch clear, and some silicone adhesive. Let's get started. To start with, clean it down really good with lacquer thinner. Get inside the edges where the dirt is. Make sure all the grease and oil is off of it. On both sides, the inside as well. You could go in through the bottom of the blow mold and clean them. Clean those edges because they'll show through later. And we'll be gluing the inside as well. So lacquer thinner, get it all cleaned up. And then we proceed. Now we're going to stitch these sections together in key areas, starting with this vertical here, where it makes the first turn here, and also here. We're going to use the soldering iron tip to make the holes for the stitches. To stitch it, we're going to use the cable fasteners. Get the soldering gun good and hot. Make sure the tip is clean. Then we're going to make some stitch holes for the nylon straps. It's melted straight through. We couldn't possibly drill this because you could have drilled any kind of drill bit to this, it's going to crack. And then get the plastic off the soldering gun with your steel wool. We'll proceed to make a series of stitch holes. Keep the tip of the soldering gun clean. We'll go to the next point and melt a hole through it for our stitches. Poor Frosty. So keep in mind this, you're looking for a structural repair here, not so much cosmetic. We'll do the cosmetic stuff on the front, but since this damage is so extreme on the back, we're going to do some Frankenstein stitches. We'll close her up, but it'll look pretty good. You got these high spots from the edge of the soldering gun, just take them off with a razor. Now that we're proceeding with closing the wound up here, we're getting into the deformity area. What we're going to do is heat this with the hot air gun, but we are going to need to do stitches closer together here. These we're able to do about 2 to 3 inches apart. These, since we're fighting this deformity, we're going to have to do probably about 1.5 inches apart. Probably take 3 to close this up. So since we have this large void here and we're starting to almost force the plastic into place, it's time for the heat gun. Let's soften it up before we proceed, otherwise we're going to perpetuate the crack. We'll cause other cracks. Let's get it soft with the heat gun before we start stitching. We'll go from there. Then we'll apply our stitch from the bottom side. Easier said than done, but we need to do this and proceed slowly because we got to make sure we're putting these stitches in the right locations and whether it's going to hold together, whether it'll pull the areas together just like that. Looks good. Get them going. So all together we applied 3 stitches along this C crack. And 10 stitches stopping the vertical crack at the turn along and down the side. And now we'll glue that crack together and conceal the stitches. Now that we've got all of our stitches in place, we're going to start applying hot melt glue. So hot melt glue isn't the ideal adhesive for HDPE. However, for our purpose here, it'll be great. There is a HDPE glue by 3M. It's a 2-part with an activator for $80, but it's not going to give us structural support. So somehow we still have to do stitching to carry the weight and then bring the pieces together so the weight is redistributed. So we're going to start gluing this with the hot melt glue gun, but before we do, we're going to heat the area to prep it so the adhesion is better. We'll do small areas to start. Just watch the heat. If it gets too hot, it'll melt or it'll expand and you'll get too much expansion and cracks will form. And it could dip in. Start with small areas. You can see what starts to happen as you heat it. It starts to expand and opens up the crack. Now take the hot melt gun and lay it, drag it right into the crack. Cover the stitches, push a little in through the stitch hole so it gives some support so it doesn't fall in later and start divoting. But the glue will hide the stitches. Take it to the next closest point of a repair, the next stitch, But remember, it's not going to be hot enough to go forward because it's only going to stay hot for a while, the surface of the plastic. So lay your glue in rows, make it wide enough to conceal the stitch and wide enough to provide adhesion and structural support. Go farther around the crack so you stop the crack from proceeding, or traveling, I should say. Once you have the glue in place, we're going to heat it even more with the hot air gun to set the glue. The glue will get real hot and start melting into the plastic. That's exactly what we want. That'll do a little more here. Again, travel. Here's a crack that meets in 3 areas. We want to travel around this and create more support. And you could go into originally glued area and it'll just melt right in. You can melt a previous repair with the heat gun. Heat that glue up so it melts into the crack and it'll adhere better. Get it good and hot, but be careful, don't over temp it, it'll melt the plastic. The hotter you get the glue, the more it sets into the plastic, the better the repair. You have to start backing off because it starts to liquefy. Remember, do small areas, because when you heat this glue up with the hot air gun, after you glue it, it'll turn to liquid, almost like water, and it'll start running everywhere. So you kind of need to move the mold around to maintain the puddle where you want it. So again, we'll do this small area, small sections, preheat, and then glue. Get it hot as just before the point it starts to melt. And that you can see it'll start to spread a little bit, or it'll almost start falling in. And that's the time to put the glue on. Fill the holes to make a little bridge. And then travel right along that crack. Then work it into your last glue point. Another row, make it wider than it is, than the crack is, because it needs to support the plastic around it. This plastic is so soft from the heat now. We're just on the border of it melting and falling in. If it does start to fall in, you could always go inside the mold and kind of prop it back up until it starts to solidify. This is starting to fall in a bit, so we'll get up in under there. Oh, a tip. Don't cut off the ends of the straps. You could use those to move the mold around while it's drying so you don't have to touch the hot glue. Because when you melt this glue, it's going to turn to a liquid, start falling through the crack, and that's exactly what we want. So you could take the end of the strap you haven't cut off yet and kind of move it around until it's all level. Perfect. So we're down to the last section of the stitch. Preheat the last area to get things lined up to get the stress off. And then lay in the last bit of glue. Go around the crack to stop it at the edge. Travel down the center, melt into the existing repair, the glue line. This stuff is hot. It's actually already kind of melting the plastic as we go along, but adding the heat gun just makes it even better. Again, heat it and melt it in. You kind of have to work the mold around since it's liquefying to get it to settle in a spot that you want it to. Now that the glue is starting to dry, it starts turning semi-transparent, almost white. You can see we've done the entire crack. Again, this is a structural repair. The cosmetic stuff's going to be on the front. We had to solidify this back. The whole thing was falling apart. Later we could come back, heat this with the gun, kind of work the edges. We could sand it, we could airbrush it, we could texture it. Let the holes start to hide pretty good. And now it rings like a bell. It's solid again. And it'll take the weight. Now we could start working on the front. Well, we've completed the major repair of the crack that traveled across the entire backside of Frosty. We did the stitching, did the hot melt glue, and now we have some structural integrity again. It's going to take the weight. We had to start with the back because the damage was so bad and it pretty much was falling apart every time we moved it. So since the front's going to take so much attention, we had to stabilize the back first. But there it is, and this is a structural repair again, and we could come back later and blend this using some heat and different texture tools, and we could also airbrush it. So in the next video, we'll start on the front.